Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is in your city. I'm your host, Sunny M, and you're listening to Come Out and Shout. I wanted to veer off my previous podcast that I was talking to you guys about. It was in regards to my coming out, story. Uh, I did mention that I don't really think of it as a story. I think of it as a chapter in your life because I think coming out, as I touched on my last episode, it's not really something that happens once. It's a consistent thing that keeps happening to you. I don't know if you've been actually taken that in, but as queer individual people, I think that we're constantly coming out, whether it's on an everyday basis, whether you're in line in the groceries, and you happen to have some random conversation with a stranger, and you start talking about things, and then when you're talking about you're referencing your significant other, you might say, "Oh, my partner." Um, and sometimes I get like a look, as in like, "Okay, well, why wouldn't you just say your boyfriend, right?" Because you don't feel like you don't know if you can be open with that stranger about, I guess, yourself, and that's also a process of becoming okay with yourself. I used to do that for the most part of my life. I always used to refer to my girlfriend as my partner because I wasn't sure how people would react. And I'm not just saying this as people that go by in your life as strangers, but I'm talking about like, anybody from a coworker to, like I said, a stranger on the street, or, if you're going shopping and, you go to the guy section to pick up a shirt and you're actually buying that for yourself, but then you go to the cash register and they're like, "Oh, is that a nice shirt? That's a nice shirt. Are you buying that for your boyfriend?" And it's like, "No, I'm actually buying it for me." I do shop in the guys section. And I do like guys' clothing, so I'm gonna buy myself a guy's shirt. I mean, who gives a shit? Anyways, so we're always coming out. Obviously, that's a larger issue and a larger topic in that sense, but in regards to the episode today, I kind of wanted to continue on what I was talking to you guys about coming out. Um, coming out isn't, it happens and then, it's over. Especially in the South Asian community, being a queer person, it never ends. Like, you're literally dealing with coming out like every day, whether, for example, it's me, I talk to my mom pretty much every day because I don't really live. I'm originally from Toronto, but I moved to Vancouver to be with my girlfriend, and yeah, I talk to my mom like pretty much every other day, but we'll have these conversations, and when we're talking about certain things, um, it's like sometimes she forgets that I either live with my girlfriend or I have a girlfriend. So, I always like to poke and touch on the fact that, Janaea this, Janaea that, just to, remind her that I don't live alone, because she acts like, I am living alone, like, I'm by myself. Like, she acts like it's the end of the world, but I'm living on my own, in a different province, away from family. Like, okay, so they'll be like, "Oh, well, you don't live with anybody. You're not around family." And what they don't understand is that, um, yeah, I am actually with somebody who's, my family, my significant other, my girlfriend, and soon to be a wife. Like, I do plan on marrying her. So, yeah, she's my family. So, to say that I'm alone and not with my family is sort of a disrespect towards me. So, this episode's really to touch on the fact that, being queer in South Asian, specifically from my experience, um, our relationships aren't valid enough, and I don't think in our parents' minds it's real. Like, it's not a thing that actually exists in their mind. And, you know, it's one thing to ignore that, but I think that us as a generation needs to change that, because and to be fair, it's not their fault. Like, I mean, it's their fault if they're not willing to change their ways, but isn't their fault in the way that they grew up. Like, they didn't have those resources and open spaces that we have now as individuals to talk about things, to open up and have discussions about problems that um, that are existent and prevalent in our culture, especially South Asian culture. Obviously, I don't have an experience in other different cultures, but I'm, talking about it from that perspective. So yeah, this I kind of wanted to talk about the fact that I myself am still coping with coming out every day, to my parents, even though we've had this discussion about 3 times and probably like another 100 times. But it's going to be a process every single day, or every time I have an encounter with my parents. I'm going to be coming out to them and reminding them that I'm not alone. I'm never going to be with a guy. I'm with a girl. I'm going to marry her. We're going to have children, or however our future, plans out to be. And that's just, a part of who I want to be, is to make a change. And I think it's a pretty big part for me, as a queer person, to make a move like that, because there's probably other queer people, whether it's, gay guys, or, other lesbians in our community, or, trans people, or anybody that's a part of the LGBTQ plus community that, might be in our South Asian community, but they're still trying to navigate their ways in terms of being able to come out. So, from my perspective, I kind of want to be able to touch on the fact that, even though I've actually physically, mentally, psychologically, accepted myself, and am still trying to come out to my parents all the time, it's not over. And, I kind of wanted to touch on the various examples of how I come out every day. So I kind of wanted to touch on the fact of how I moved away. So I had met my girlfriend in 2015, and I had moved out to Vancouver in near end of 2016. And the way I moved out, it wasn't really like, it wasn't a planned move out. It was just kind of like a up and go kind of thing. And obviously, if you do come from a South Asian family, it's like the end of the world if you're, moving abroad. Like, anyway, so the way I did it, I don't totally agree with it. And for a long time since I had done that, specifically my mom, would make me feel guilty of the fact that I moved away and I left her behind, and I had no responsibilities as a child, and how could I do this to her? And it was emotional guilt that she kind of put on me, and till this day she still does. I mean, she's not as bad as she used to be, because I think she's actually accepted the fact that I'm not coming back. I do visit, of course. Like, I visit all the time, like, at least 2 or 3 times in the year. But for the most part, like, she still tries to cope with the fact that I moved away. And like I said, I didn't do it in the best way. I kind of just said, yeah, so I'm going to go there for maybe a couple weeks and figure out what I'm going to do there. And I didn't really say why I was moving there. I just said that I was looking for work, which was not a lie. I was looking for work because I couldn't find any work in the film industry at the time in Toronto. I wasn't getting paid much for the jobs that I was doing, so I just figured, hey, like, let's try moving to Vancouver. And of course, my girlfriend lived in Vancouver, so that was a plus. So I moved there. I had packed all my boxes, my shit, and I just, sent them to Vancouver. And the process of me moving my boxes and all my stuff out kind of took a toll on my mom, I think, and she then realized that, wow, she's moving out, like, she's leaving. And I've always been, I was always I'd always stayed, like, I'd be at home, but, like, I'd go out with my friends and stuff, but I was always, like, there. Like, I was always there, like, with my parents. Like, I never, I went to York University in Toronto. Like, I never, I commuted back and forth from school to home. Like, I didn't live far away from my post-secondary institute. So even during that time, I was still with my parents. So I've always been with my parents. And so for me to make this big move, not only was a big change for them, but it was a big change for me. And so I'm not saying that I moved away and everything was hippity, everything was happy. It wasn't. For the first year, I was coping with a lot of, guilt. I was so ridden with guilt because not only did my mom make me feel bad about it, but I actually did feel bad because as a South Asian, person, you think, oh my God, like, I'm abandoning my parents. Like, who's going to take care of them? Like, how can I be so selfish? And I think that's one of the things that we need to understand, is that just because we're doing something for ourselves doesn't mean, we're not being good children, we're not being good people, or not caring about our families. Like, we do have to do things for ourselves, and that's not being selfish. That's just being a person, an individual that wants to have a life. you wanting to live your authentic self isn't a crime. I don't think if I was straight and I wanted to do that, it would be such a big deal. But because I happen to be gay, it's 10 times a big deal. Like, I think my mom would have gotten over it if it was with a guy. I think she would have been like, oh, okay, yeah, first year, second year, maybe because I wasn't living near her. But I think she would eventually be okay with it. Like, when I had compared me moving away to be with Janaea to all of many of our cousins that moved out, say to the States, even they live in a freaking different country. But it's okay. It was validated because they were married, and it was okay that way. Like, or even if they weren't married and they had moved out, and they lived with their significant other that happened to be a guy, but it was okay because it was a guy, and whatever. How is that even how is that even okay to say? Like, so yeah. So the first year, I had a hard time coping with the fact that I had moved out like the way I did, and I just recently in the last 2 years I've come to be okay with that. I've come to get rid of that guilt that I've been forced to feel, because I realized I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not being a bad child. And when I'd have conversations with my mom, she's like, "Well, you're not here for us, and you're not here, so you don't know what's going on, and you just left like that, so, and because you were selfish, and all these things that make you rids you with guilt, and makes you feel like shit, really, and then it makes you not want to be so happy with the life that you've chosen, right?" So the first year was really hard for me, and it wasn't just because of the way I did it, but it was also because it was my first time, like, literally away from my home, like what I used to call home, like my family. I've always been around my family, and that's a big change for me as well. So, and if you do come from a South Asian family, you know that everything's about family. Like, your mom and dad. Like, there's this notion about how your parents are like. I know some people think of it as that, but they think of parents as like almost close to God. So you have um, obviously this isn't what I think, or what generally people think, but for a long time, um, and this isn't a religion either. I think it's just people making up shit and calling it religion. But for a long time, people used to think of so there was God, and then there's your parents, and then there's your husband, and then there's you, or oh sorry, your children, and then there's you. So you come last, and then you take care of your children, and then your husband, and then your parents, and then there's God. So there's like this hierarchy of who comes first and who you should care for. And I'm not saying not to care for these people, but why is there a hierarchy? Like, why is there a level of, um, you know, who should be cared for more? I think everybody should be cared for, in equal plane. But at the same time, I think that coming from a South Asian family, I think they also expect you to put them like parents first before your significant other. And I've been really, really dealing with that. Like, first of all, obviously, because I'm queer, but in general, I think that South Asian people like to validate. If you're married and you have a husband, then that's okay to put your husband first before your parents. But if you're not married, or you're not with any guy or whatever, then you should be putting your parents first, and then comes you. First of all, I myself obviously grew up in a generation like today's generation, and think way differently. I actually think the opposite. I think that whoever you're with, should come first. Obviously, I'm not saying to disrespect your parents. It's very challenging to, you know, mesh the two priorities. But really, your significant other, in my opinion, should come first. And I'm really challenged with trying to make my parents understand that. Specifically my mom, because I don't really have like that much of a close relationship with my dad. Like, I talk to him, but it's very like minimal conversation. Like, when I'm having a conversation with my parents, it's really my mom. So I'll be talking to her about like just different things, and then the topic of just a relationship in general, and like and then something will come up in regards to something will just trigger her to go off on the fact that she should come first. And I've really tried to make her understand that she can't make me choose between her and my significant other. Like, that's just absolutely wrong, first of all, and unfair. Like, how do you expect me to put you first? Like, would you expect me to put you first in front of, say, if I had a husband or a boyfriend? I don't think so. So, um, that constant ignorant thinking is just draining to deal with. And I think for the most part, I think a lot of us deal with that in different levels. I mean, not everyone's parents are the same. You know, I'm not saying all South Asian parents are the same. Absolutely not. Um, because some do think differently, some are open minded. And for those who have those open minded parents, I'm very happy for you. I'm really happy for you, actually. It's a great thing. But for those that come out to their parents and still come out to them every day and have to deal with it, it's so stressful. Like, it's exhausting. Like just how much energy it takes out of you and how much anxiety you feel every day, and it's so draining. Like, I feel drained just talking about it, like, because I know how it feels. I deal with it all the time, and some days are good, some days I don't feel that way because they're not being ignorant. Like, some days my mom will ask me how my girlfriend's doing or what she's doing, or blah blah blah, and sometimes my dad will ask. But for the most part, it's just really draining to continually have the same conversation about what I did wrong, what I need to do to change, and what choices I made to affect my life. And first of all, being gay is not a choice. That's the mentality that my parents have, that I've chosen to be gay, that I chose as lifestyle, and I've chosen to leave my parents. None of these were choices, and actually, me moving away was for the better, because in my opinion, my relationship, aside from talking about my queer identity with them, did get better. I get along with my mom way more than I did when I was living with them, and I think aside from my queer identity. But as a South Asian person, I think it makes a big difference when you do live away from your parents, just to get that sort of independence and sort of space to find yourself, where you're not being berated and, forced to feel certain ways or feel guilty about feeling certain ways. Um, or even your profession, like always being questioned about your profession. Like, you know, aside, like, again, from my queer identity, like, I deal with my parents all the time, like, in regards to my career choices. So I went to school to be a journalist. Didn't happen. Didn't really like the industry. So after I moved to Vancouver, I decided to just look for a job in general, just like any job. And I just work for a lighting company, but the best part about it is that I have flexible hours. I can take whatever time I want off, and I get paid really well, and I've got time to do my things that I like, whether it's this podcast or I love to write, so I write on my free time. I love making music, so that's another hobby that I have. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, why is there such a stigma with not being able to follow up with your career? Like, why? Why is it such a big deal? If you went to school for, say, being, I don't know, an accountant, and shit didn't go your way, and you decided 3 years after going to school and, a year after working in accounting, you didn't like accounting, so you just looked for a different job. And I don't think it's just with your parents. I think this is an entire way of thinking that happens in the South Asian community. Again, not saying everyone's community, because I'm speaking specifically from my experiences and what I've experienced from this community that I come from. But, like, I'll go to a wedding, and, like, I'll have a conversation to catch up with my cousins, because, again, I live in Vancouver, so when I come, all my cousins and family and relatives are all in Toronto. Like, I have nobody in Vancouver, right? So I don't really know anybody in Vancouver. I have no friends in Vancouver, like ones that I've had for a long time. And so I'll go to a wedding and, say hey to, an auntie or, a masi or whatever. Um, and, uh, and the first thing they'll be asking is, oh, how's Vancouver? And then obviously, like, yeah, it's good. And like, I swear, like, it's the same conversation. So they'll be like, oh, so, how is work there? Like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I had this conversation with you the other day during, the puja for the, because, like, in Indian weddings, it's like a, 3-4 day thing. Like, there's religious ceremonies that happen before the wedding, and so you see these people for like 3-4 days. So you'll have this conversation like 2 days ago, and the same masi or auntie or uncle will ask you the same thing. Oh, how's your job? And what do you do? And originally, like, for the most part, my mom said that I told my relatives that I was going to Vancouver to work and film and blah, blah, blah. So they'll be like, so when I tell them, I'm like, yeah, no, my job's good. And they'll ask me what I do, because obviously they don't remember or whatever. So I'll be like, yeah, I work in lighting. And they'll be like, oh, oh, lighting. Oh, what happened to your film job? Okay, well, it didn't work out, so I don't work in film anymore. End of story. And they'll look at you with such like shock and like, but you went to school for it, so why aren't you in your, like, well, again, didn't work out. Who cares? Make money. I'm happy. Why does it matter? And so you feel like, you like it's just a shitty feeling, like feeling like that. And then same instance. So I was at a wedding a year and a half ago, and me, my mom, and my brother were talking to one of my cousins, and he just, again, he happened to ask me how I was in Vancouver, and awkward conversation when he asks, so do you ever think you're gonna move back to Toronto? No. And then I'm obviously saying that in front of my mom and my brother. My brother's cool, by the way. He's like really cool with everything. Um, but anyway, so I'll say like, yeah, no, I don't think I'll be moving to Vancouver. And then I'll see my mom's face, and she'll just whatever she has that face she'll make when she feels uncomfortable. And then they'll ask me, oh, so what do you do? And I'll be like, yeah, I work in lighting. And then they're like, oh, so you don't work in like your field anymore? And I'll be like, nope. And then they'll ask my brothers the same question. And so he works as a paralegal, and like so anyways, I'll ask him, and he's like, yeah, I work as a paralegal for like blah blah blah. And they'll be like, oh wow, that's great. Like, why is that any more valid than what I do? Like, fuck you, really. Like, like, fuck you. It's just fucking unbelievable, like, how people are. Like, it's just like, really, you're gonna like downplay like who I am as a person based on my like. Anyways, so that's just a couple of things that like I said, as people in South Asian communities or families, I could say, act and behave, or from my experiences that they do. So yeah, so that's kind of where I was going from. And yeah, so kind of what I wanted to veer off on from that is, you know, we're always going to have people questioning who we are. We're always going to have people questioning what we do. And your parents are always going to question what you do. They're never going to, their first reaction isn't to validate what you're doing. They're going to question it like no tomorrow. Because from their perspective, it's not what they know. It's not what they're comfortable with. So they're not comfortable with their children doing something that's outside the box. And that's something that we need to be able to change in our minds, that it's okay to do something that's different and not normal or regular, you could say. Like, it's okay to just jump on a plane and go to Tokyo just to experience a life. Like my cousin, no one expected her to do this, but she went to Thailand recently to teach like children math and English, and it was just a thing that she wanted to do. And obviously her mom was like probably nervous, or just because she wanted to go up and go to Thailand for a couple months to teach and also go backpacking, but with complete strangers. But there's also a level of support that she got from her mom, I think, and that made all of a difference. And I know a lot of other cousins would, question me like, "Oh my God, like, but you don't know anybody there, and like, so who are you gonna like live with?" And she was fine. She found like a cute family and like and friends that she stayed with. Like she made lots of friends, and she stayed with this family that was more than welcoming, and she was fine. Like she came back and she was fine. Like she made relationships there and like friendships, and she became close to those people she stayed with. So for us, our generation now, I think it's important to make these changes and to allow our parents to like give them space to learn that it's okay to do things that aren't I guess linear. I guess you could say, like, there isn't a linear way of living. Okay, let's be real. Yeah, so that's kind of just how I've been seeing things go. And I did also want to actually touch on an incident that happened that I just actually thought about, now that I'm thinking about it. The other day I was talking to my mom on the phone, and we were just talking about grandparents and just in general, like families and stuff, and how people are different these days. And so she's like, my mom was like, yeah, and she's like, I can't wait to be, I can't wait till your brother has children, when he eventually does. And she said it like in a way like she wasn't like she didn't actually indirectly say anything, but when the way she said that when my brother is to have kids, it was like more so like a diss to um, the fact that I'm gonna have a future family, that I'm gonna have a future wife, that I'm gonna want kids and have kids eventually. The fact that she made it seem like she's not gonna have grandchildren, besides and aside from the fact that my brother will have grandchildren, just kind of showed a disrespect towards my relationship, and not thinking of it as real. And that kind of hurt me, and still bothered me, even though it was a couple of days ago, but it still like irks me like to my core that my relationship with my girlfriend and the future I want to build isn't valid enough. And I think um, for me, I think I need to come to terms that they're never going to accept the fact that um, that it's valid. They're never going to think it's valid, and they're never going to approve of it. And if they do, and whether they do, that's their own process. But I won't allow it to stop me from living who I am, because it's not fair. I shouldn't um, put my feelings and my wishes aside just because it's not approved of by somebody that isn't actually living them or affected by them directly. So I just kind of, it shocked me, and it didn't shock me because I didn't not expect it, but I was just kind of taken aback, like, wow, she just kind of said that. And that just kind of put me in perspective, as in, like, you think that your parents are some sort learning and trying to understand, but then she says shit like this, and I'm just like, okay, well, we're back to fucking square one again. So, you know, um, so it's just tough, and it's like I said, even though I've come out, I'm probably gonna have to come out for the rest of my life if they don't come to terms with it. And that's just part of being South Asian and queer, everybody. That's, I mean, again, from my perspective, it's just the way it is. And I don't think you should have to choose or put it into two polarities. Um, I think that people sometimes think that they can only be one or the other, and I think discussions about that have been happening. I saw a couple of pages the other day that actually talked about that, like dealing with living, being South Asian and identifying and being proud of being a South Asian, and then also being a queer person, and how you're actually expected to choose one or the other when you can't live as both. Um, I think I totally understand that. Like, it's so hard when you go to a wedding, especially any kind of family function, and you are living a double life. Like, like I said, I go to Toronto a lot to see my parents, but it's also to, for the most part, I'll, tie in a wedding or something that's the same time when I go there. And I do feel like I live two lives. Like, is when I go there, like, I have this, it's almost like I have another, like a double life. Like, I'll see my cousins and stuff, and my cousins are pretty cool. Like, they pretty much know, like, about me and like how I am, and my queer identity and stuff, and they're more than understanding and welcoming and loving about it. I'm talking about, like, obviously older aunties and stuff. And like, just the way you present yourself, and just the way it's like a totally different, like, experience. Like, I feel like when I'm wearing like like an Indian suit or a sari, like, I feel like I have to be girlier. Like, I'm pretty much like, I'm kind of like in the middle. Like, I'm not really girly, or like I'm not totally girly. Like, I am a tomboy, I guess you could say. But I don't mind wearing saris and Indian suits. Like, I don't mind it. Like, I don't feel the most comfortable in it, but there's some sort of like wardrobe that I like wearing. So anyways, yeah, so when I go to weddings and stuff, I'll feel like a totally different person because I'm portraying like this normal Indian girl. But there's a totally different side to me, my queer side, that I don't show. Like, I don't, obviously you're not going and up and talking to your auntie about how you're gay and, you know, how you miss your girlfriend. Um, there's this whole side, and people don't know that side to you, and it's hard to, it is hard to cope and be that sort of Indian girl that everyone expects you to be. Even the way you're expected to like sit or like speak. Like um, I know that it was at a family function. It was just a family gathering, and I was told to change my clothes because it looked too like. Um, my dad didn't say like ratty or like boyish, but he just said to wear something more proper. And I was wearing like I was just wearing pants and like a t-shirt, and he's like, go somewhere something more suitable. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know what that means. So I just put on a pair of jeans and a nicer top, and I came down. And oh, he's like, oh, that's better. But it was just like, okay, well, I guess it's more feminine. But like, what was wrong with what I was wearing before? It wasn't like it was ugly or trashy or ripped or like, you know, what I usually dress up as. It's like a hobo. Like I like to wear like baggy clothes and stuff like that. But it was like an image they needed to show everybody, and that's part of hiding your queer identity. You know, sometimes I'd like to wear a suit, or sometimes, you know, I even thought about like, you know, it'd be cool to wear a kafni, which is like a guy's Indian version to like a guy's suit that people wear at Indian functions and stuff. But I've thought about it. You know, it'd be cool if there was a designer that makes kafnis. That'd be awesome, actually. Um, Veering on that, actually, I happened to see a couple. I think it was a year ago or something. I follow this designer named Sandy Dillon, and or Sandy Leone. I forgot how to say her name. Anyways, she's a fashion designer, and she actually takes Indian fabrics and she creates power suits from them. And I thought that was really cool. Like that's really cool. Um, and so I happened to show my mom a picture of that, and she's like, "Oh, that's nice," like, you know. And I'm like, "Yeah, wouldn't that be really cool to wear that at the wedding?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, look, it's like sari material. Like it was a suit made out of sari material, and I thought that was so cool and different." And she's like, "Well, I don't want you to wear that." I'm like, "Well, why not?" And she's like, "Well, it's not proper. It's not like, you know, it's not traditional." I'm like, "Okay, well, why isn't it traditional? It's sari material." I'm like, "Why? Is it because it's a suit? That's why it's not okay?" I'm like, "What if, first of all, what if, you know, I wasn't queer and I had asked my mom to wear this? Wonder what she would have said." Like, or even if my cousin came to a wedding wearing that, I'm sure she would have been like, "Oh, that's different. That's new. Oh, it's a different style." But because I'm queer and she associates that with being like, you know, a boy or whatever she associates that with, um, it was like she got so upset. She's like, "Well, if you're gonna wear that, then don't bother coming to the wedding." And it was just a whole conversation, an argument. Like it was a fight, and it led to other things. But for the most part, it's just like this constant need to have a valid reputation in society, and because of that, because your parents want to maintain that like reputation, you feel like you're disrespecting them if you want to be yourself. So for the most part, I do, you know, I don't bother to really, you know, look so different just because I don't want to deal with, I don't want them to have to deal with, um, you know, questions that our relatives might ask, because I'm not actually there to, you know, explain. Like I live all the way in Vancouver, so for them to like, um, you know, I'm not saying that it's something that they have to deal with, but it is really something that they have to answer to, because I'm not there to explain it. So yeah, at the time it's nice to just be yourself, but in the South Asian community, I think it's hard to be yourself and then, I guess, have your parents to deal with, um, I guess, your choices when you're not actually there. I think it's different if you're living with them or you live, you know, close to them or something, and then you can tell your cousins to shut the fuck up, or you know, your relatives to go fuck themselves. Really, that's what I have to say. Really, go fuck yourself. Um, so yeah, I think there's just this really, it's just a really hard path for us as South Asians who are queer, um, and I think it's going to be a very long time till a lot of it changes. But I think we're doing a really, really good job and making it more apparent and more normalized to be queer in South Asian. I think there's a lot of people and activists and you know, individuals out there that are trying to normalize it, and I think that's really important because we don't really see our color out there as much. Like, and I think it's more so because we're afraid. Well, we were afraid of being the first Indian people to be known as like queer, but we're out there, we're here, we're just as valid and just as there as whether they're queer black people out there or white queer people out there, we're just as valid as them. And I'm not just saying South Asians are another caste that should be incorporated. I'm saying all types of queer people, whether they're Oriental or whether they're South Asian or whether they're Hispanic or whatever they are. But everyone is equal and everyone deserves to be known as queer. And I still find that we as South Asians aren't really represented in mainstream media. I just happened to see. I haven't watched I haven't watched the actual new L Word Generation Q yet, but I did see a big. It was an article based on like who they wanted to cast and stuff, and they wanted to make a point of casting real, authentic Hispanic people to play these Hispanic characters, which is, I think is great. But I still don't think that, and not just that show, but in general, shows and movies don't do a good enough job representing South Asian people. There's only this one, whether they do happen to be South Asian, sometimes they don't even play South Asians. Like, back to the L Word, like the new Generation Q, they had, which is amazing. They had I think she's like the character is Persian, or Middle Eastern at least. They have a Middle Eastern character in the show, which is great. But that's not the same thing as casting a South Asian person. I'm sorry, but Middle Eastern people are different than Indian people, and I think that we tend to be grouped as one, but there's totally different experiences that Middle Eastern people might experience than what South Asian people might experience. So to group us as one is I think, unfair, and our voices get hidden that way under one umbrella. Again, different topic, veering off topic, but I just kind of wanted to say how, I understand why it's so hard for us to come out and why it's so hard for us to talk about issues, because like, I'm just saying, in the last couple of years, because, when I was coming out, I didn't see me anywhere. Like, I would have to go to see, a white movie or a white show to, relate to being queer, but there was never that South Asian queer identity that I could relate to. Now I kind of do, like, I see it here and there, but I don't see it so prevalent as I do see white and black and sometimes Oriental. The three main ones I always see is black, white, and Hispanic. And I think that people who are writing shows or people who are making movies should really incorporate that, because there isn't just one, two, three types. Their types like come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, and they need to do more justice in that. Just so, not just because I'm saying so, but people like younger people who are trying to cope with coming out. And I'm not just saying for people that live in America, but I'm saying for people that live, internationally, that want something to relate to, and in that because America has such a great power and a voice in our film industries and in our films and TV shows, we should do justice in being able to present and represent everybody. Really, obviously, that's going to take time, but I think the efforts have just recently started towards that. So there are strides for that, and I'm glad about that. Obviously, I wish it was there when I was growing up and trying to relate to a South Asian queer identity, but it wasn't, and it's not the end of the world. But I'm hoping that it changes and it just progresses over the time period. And more movies and shows have that representation of South Asian queer people. So that's kind of pretty much it, what I wanted to talk to you guys about this podcast. Next podcast is going to be talking about just weird like weird traditions in regards to girls having their periods. I think that South Asian people, communities, and culture and families, they have this like stigma about girls having their periods. I'm not going to get into too much of it, but I did want to talk to you guys and let you know that that's going to be our next episode. Menstruation is normal, everybody. It is regular. It should be just a normal thing, just like you pee, or just like you know, whatever. So that's going to be our next episode, and I will dive into that in more detail next episode. So thank you again for listening, and yeah, just taking your time out to hear what I had to say today. If you do have any comments, more questions, please feel free to comment on the Instagram post. And I will talk to you guys the next podcast.